Welcome to the first class on firewalls, and in this class we're going to be talking about the basics of firewalls, how to use them, how to set them up, how to configure them, how they can be used to secure your network. Now there are many different brands of firewalls and types of firewalls, and each brand of firewall type is going to have their own interface and own way to configure the firewall, and the concept though is always going to be the same. And we'll talk about some of those concepts as we go through our class here. And as you can see, I'm using a product called Astaro Security Gateway. They have a free home use product that I'm going to be using to do this training class. And we're going to step through some of the configurations. I've also got a Linux virtual machine running that we're going to use to sort of test some of the firewall rules that we set up so that we can see the effect of what we do. So as you can see here, in most cases, all firewalls are going to have a login. Normal thing, you want to be able to have password access. You don't want somebody just willy-nilly being able to connect to your firewall and configure it. So I'm going to go ahead and log in here. And normally when you take a firewall out of the box, it's going to have a setup program, or the first time you connect to it, it's going to have some kind of wizard. Or in some situations, it'll have a default password that it'll tell you about so that you can log into the web interface. In most cases, there'll be a web interface, and then you'll be able to go in and change any settings that you need to change. Now, obviously, in this firewall, I'm not going to go through every single setting on the Astaro Security Gateway because, again, every firewall is different. We're just going to be focusing on some of the basic functionalities of a firewall and the effects of the changes or the rules that you put in place on the firewall. Now in most cases you're going to have a minimum on a firewall of 2 interfaces, and in our firewall we've got an external interface and an internal interface. And the reason you're going to have that is you sort of want to think about a firewall as sort of like a like a spigot where traffic is going through one direction and it's got to come out the other direction, and in order to come out somebody's got to open the valve, or somebody's got to open the door to let the traffic out. So that's why you're at least going to have 2 interfaces on the firewall. So in our case, internal, as the name implies, connects to an internal network that our virtual machine, a Linux virtual machine, is connected to. And all the traffic coming from that virtual machine is going to have to pass through this Astaro Security Gateway firewall in order to get out to the rest of the world, or in our case, the internet. And the opposite direction holds true as well. Any traffic that's coming from the internet is going to have to hit the Astaro Security Gateway before it's allowed into our network, into our internal part of the firewall. And that is basically the idea of the firewall, is that it's separating your internal network from the rest of the internet. So you can see why a firewall is such an important tool to have. And pretty much any network that connects to the network or to the internet, as well as some that don't, that just have internal intranets, that they still want to keep traffic separate and secure certain parts of their network, they're going to incorporate a firewall. So in our scenario, we're going to play around with setting up some different rules to see what happens as we change some of the rules on the firewall. We're going to see what happens to some of the traffic. Now, let me pull up our virtual machine here real quick, and I'm going to show you the fact that we don't have any rules in place. And so we don't have any rules in place, and so most of our traffic is going to get blocked. So I'm logging in here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up a command prompt, and the normal command that you would use to sort of look at network connectivity is ping. So we're going to see, okay, can I connect to my firewall? And this is the IP address of our firewall, and I'm getting replies, so that means that yes, I can communicate with the firewall. Well, let's see, can I communicate with the outside world? What if I ping yahoo.com? I'm not getting any responses back. I wonder why that could be. Now let's open up a web browser and let's see what happens if we open up a web browser, see if we can get any kind of traffic going outbound with our web browser. And as this comes up, we're just going to sit here and twiddle our thumbs as the web browser comes up. And when it does, we'll check and see if we have web connectivity. Now in most situations, most sort of corporate level firewalls, out of the box, they're going to come locked down. And at least from a network security perspective, that's what you want. You don't want to be able to just put a firewall in place and it not do what it's supposed to do, block all traffic. So preferably you're going to want a firewall that out of the box it's going to block all traffic, and you're going to have to make a decision on what's allowed out and what's allowed in. Now you see when I open Firefox here, it's trying to load this Mozilla site. Nothing's happening. It ain't gonna happen, because why? Our firewall is blocking the traffic. So if I try to go to google.com, let's see what happens. Just keeps loading. Our firewall is blocking traffic even out to the internet for just simple web pages. And that's what you want out of the box, is for your firewall to block that kind of traffic. So this test kind of basically confirms that that's how our firewall is currently set up. So we're going to create some rules to allow some of this traffic to go out. And in order to do that, we're going to go on our firewall. Now in this particular Star firewall, we've got all the settings on the left. And in most cases, that's what you'll see on a web interface. And we're going to go over to this network security section, and we're going to go into a packet filter section. Now, don't get caught up in some of the nomenclature. Some of it you'll find is pretty much standard verbiage. Depending on the firewall, that may or may not change. So in this particular case, it's called packet filter. And this is where we would set up different rules for what we're going to allow and what we're not going to allow. So let's see if we can figure out here together how to allow, let's say, web traffic out to the internet. So in this case, I'm going to click on New Rule. And let's see what happens here. So in this particular firewall, we can create groups of, a group would be sort of like if you could put together a bunch of clients, for example, or maybe even this rule would be part of a group. I think in this particular firewall, that's what this is talking about here, is that you can set up groups of rules to apply to certain clients or certain networks that are connected to your firewall. In this case, I'm not going to choose a group. We're just going to put in some information here. This position, I think probably in this firewall, what this basically means is, where do you want this rule to be? That's an important concept in firewalls, is in most cases, firewalls will have a level of precedence. So whatever rules you put in, normally a rule at the top is going to take first precedence over all other rules that are listed. And that's important, because if you want certain types of traffic to be blocked, but if it doesn't get blocked, you want some other level of blockage to go on further down the list, then that's what you can do. So in our situation, we're just going to leave it as default and see what happens there. Now here we have it kind of put in some entries for us. It says, okay, what's your source? Source is always where the traffic starts from. So in our case, our traffic is starting from our internal network. But as you can see here, it's wanting us to put any. And in most cases, as I hover over this, you'll see that any basically means all networks. We don't want that in our particular rule. We want to specify that the traffic source is going to be coming from our internal network. Now keep in mind, you could get as specific as saying, I want it, this traffic, this rule I'm setting up is only going to look at traffic that's sourced or that's coming from a particular computer on your network with a particular IP address. But in this case, we're not going to go that, get that anal about it. We're just going to add a particular, we're going to tell it the internal network. And then in this firewall, you can either add an object. In most firewalls, it's called an object, something that you're going to use to refer to what your source is. I'm going to open this little folder here and see if we've got a list or an object here that represent our internal network. And we do. We've got an internal address, internal broadcast, internal network. So I'm going to try to use this. I'm going to click and drag this over, and we'll plop that in there like that. And in this particular firewall, I kind of like that feature where you can drag it, but others really don't have that. You might have to just click on it or type it in manually, or just click a little radio button. It's different depending on the firewall that you're using. Now, service. This is an important one. Service basically says what port are you going to allow in this rule. And normally on your computer, well, in all cases on your computer, any network service that runs is going to need to run on a particular port or communicate to or listen to a particular port. In our case, we're trying to get to web pages, and the port number for HTML is port 80. So right here it's saying any, so basically it's saying, okay, we're going to allow all services out. That's not what we want to set up in our scenario. In our scenario, we want to say that we're only going to allow port 80 traffic. So let's see if we've got that kind of object in a list here, and I may have to scroll down and find it. Normally, okay, here we go. Very easy to find, HTTP, and that's port 80. So what we're basically going to say here is we're allowing any traffic from our internal network to communicate outbound to this particular service, HTTP. So I'm going to click and drag that right over there, and there he goes. He's in there as a service, port 80. Destination. Now with this destination, again, you could get very granular and say I'm only going to allow port 80 traffic from my internal network out to port 80 to a specific destination. For example, let's say you got a list of all the IP addresses for all the web servers that Google uses, and you could create an object that lists all those IPs and put it in this destination. In our case, we're going to keep it simple. We're just going to say I'm going to allow all traffic outbound to any network, so that we can get to any web page that's just HTTP. Now we're not talking about HTTPS, so in this case we're probably not going to be able to get out to like your bank website. We're just talking HTTP traffic here. And of course the action we're going to allow. You could drop the connection, you could reject the connection. Now in different firewalls these things are going to mean different things as far as drop and reject. What's the difference? In most cases, drop, what that's going to do is that's going to drop the connection, and it's not going to send anything back to the source that tried to make the connection. It's just going to drop the traffic, and you know, as the end user, if you're trying to get out to the web page, you're not going to have a clue what happened. It's just not, you know, you're not going to get any response. The web page won't come up. Reject, in most cases, what reject means is that you're going to get some response back, and it's going to say whether or not you see that response, your machine is going to get a response back that basically says this connection was rejected. In our case, we're just going to say allow, because that's what we want to do, is allow. And in time event, we could set time frames when this rule will apply. So if we just wanted to apply during the workday, and then after the workday ends, we don't want any HTTP traffic going out, we could do that. We can log the traffic, and we can add a comment. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and then we're going to test and see if I know what I'm talking about here. And it looks like in this case I've actually got to turn this rule on. So even though I created it, I've got to enable it. And in most cases you'll find in firewalls that is the case. You have to enable it. It's just an extra level of security to make sure you're purposely doing things. So I'm going to hit this little button, and then we got a green light there. So now we're going to go back into our Linux virtual machine here, and we're going to see if this worked, or we're going to see if I look bad on the training video. So here's our web browser again, and we're going to see if Google will load. Drum roll please, and we have nothing. So this is actually good, because whenever you're working in a firewall, if something like this happens, obviously you'll have to troubleshoot. So what could possibly be happening? I don't know at this point. So I'm going to investigate. Okay, so we know that the traffic is not getting out of the firewall. Why? Why is it that when I open up our firewall here, we're not getting out any traffic? Well, in our next class, that's what we're going to investigate. We're going to investigate what is the missing step here to allow the traffic to come from our internal network, pass through the firewall, and successfully go out to the internet to pull up a web page.